Let's go. No, nice. Let's go. So we are here to talk about event data infrastructure, and particularly how to get your event data quality and event data pipelines running smoothly. And we're going to be featuring one of our community heroes, Steve Flitcroft from Iventi, which will introduce himself shortly. I first want to get just some housekeeping out of the way. If anyone has any audio issues, feel free to DM Brynja directly, and she will help you out, or just comment in the Slack. We have some volunteers that are checking out audio. If you can't hear us, let us know. If you have any questions, go into the Q&A and feel free to shoot over some questions. We already have some questions in advance from some people that were hyped about this. So that's great. Keep those coming. We're going to keep this pretty conversational. Steve is going to talk about his story, tell us how he successfully made some game-changing impact for Iventi. And I think I'll just dive right into quick intros from everyone here before we sort of go and talk about the agenda. So I'll start with myself, since I have the word. I'm Steph. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Avo. I've personally been in the data space for around 10, 11 years, and specifically in the product analytics space since 2013. So it's coming on 9 years, which is ridiculous and crazy, but that's how it goes. And we struggled a lot with data quality and sort of efficiency, operational efficiency around releasing new analytics events and managing pipelines when I was head of data science at QuizUp. Built a lot of internal tools, more than once, and that's sort of the origin story for why we have built Avo, which we'll cover more today here. And throwing the ball over to Eric.
Hello, I am Eric, and I work on the growth team at Rudderstack, and actually have a really fun job because I get to use Rudderstack in my day-to-day work. So we sort of manage the analytics stack and everything. And so my background is in marketing, always on the data side. So I spent a lot of years trying to build stacks and pipelines to achieve analytics. So, and actually still do that every day. Rudderstack, which is really fun. So yeah, I have felt the pain of bad data for many, many years. And as we all know, it's kind of a journey, but it's really nice to have modern tooling to make it easier. So excited to chat today.
Yeah, let's do it. Over to you, Steve. Quick intro from you as well.
Hello, I'm Steve. I'm VP of R&D at Iventi. We're a small ISV in the UK. My background, I've been everything from a front-end JavaScript, jQuery developer, through to the middleware, ASP.NET, C#, and now, funnily enough, find myself right at the back, sort of interested in data pipelines and warehousing and data quality, data governance, performance.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Steve. Look forward to diving into your story here today. So quickly, before we do that, and thank you all for great intros, I just wanted to review the agenda. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the challenge of inconsistent data broken up into multiple analytics tools. We are going to talk about sort of how to combat that, and we're going to talk about the results. And we're going to hear all of this from directly Steve's story. That's our perspective here today. So feel free to ask any questions directly to Steve in the Q&A, or if you have any specific questions about Avo, Rudderstack, feel free to jump in there and we'll cover that in an AMA in the end. So all of this is sort of mostly around Iventi's path through solving these challenges. And quickly to set the stage before we actually dive into that story, Eric and I thought it would be good to set the stage a little bit about the challenges that we see that we've seen in our day-to-day jobs historically, and that we see with so many of our different customers at Avo and Rudderstack. So Eric, jump in and help me out with this narrative here. But like ultimately what we're seeing here is we have a bunch of different platforms sending a bunch of different analytics events. Even just a seemingly simple user action like starting a game, it can be managed by multiple different teams in a single organization, and they can be triggering that event from like tens of different code paths, and that's just one user action, and then you might have endless amounts of user actions. And then Eric, you can talk a little bit about the pipeline stuff here.
Yeah, I think back on situations, and I think this affects all types of businesses. I think especially in direct to consumer businesses where you have really high volume. I think about e-commerce and some things that I've worked on in that context. Getting one data point wrong can create so many problems, especially if you think about a product clicked or something like that, and it creates all sorts of downstream problems. And then we've seen a lot that creates a bunch of downstream problems. I think everyone's familiar with that, right? Like the reports don't match, and marketing's numbers don't match, products numbers don't match, finances numbers, and you're trying to do reconciliation and all that sort of stuff. But the other thing is, even if you have, let's say you have a bad data point, if you're sending it in a disaggregated way to different analytics tools, it actually creates even worse problems, because now you have bad data and then different versions of the truth in different analytics tools, right? So maybe you have, the marketing team's analytics, you have, product analytics, the instrumentation is completely separate for that, but they're trying to track the same things. And then in a lot of cases, you're pulling data directly from a database, whether that's, like a production Postgres for your app, or, some sort of ETL process that gets it into a warehouse where it's modeled and then put into a BI tool. And so you have different teams trying to analyze the same data, but it's literally different data and different analytics tools. And so I think everyone's felt the pain of this, right? Like different teams looking at different versions of the truth. And that's really hard. And I think it affects all sorts of businesses.
Yeah, totally. And if we were just to boil this thing down here, it's like, we see all of this unreliable data, disjointed data sets, and these are the reasons why we built, Avo and Rudderstack. And like if we boil this down, it's two major causes for bad data and data problems. It's the data creation process, the planning and collecting of the raw analytics events. And if you don't do that correctly, it's basically goodbye to any decision making. And then getting that good data across the entire stack, which people all over the world have been building, their homemade solutions for that, and
Sure.
struggling with that for years.
And I'm excited, Steve, to hear you, and we can jump in to hear about your particular challenge. But I think one important point is that it's not because people are doing a bad job necessarily, or because they're not trying. This is just a really difficult problem to solve in every organization, right? It's not, people aren't falling asleep at the wheel. Even people who are trying really hard to build robust analytics, it's still a really hard job. So yeah, Steve, I'm really excited to hear about what that looked like practically in your world, because I think a lot of the audience will resonate with that experience.
Yeah. +1 on that, and I think +1 on from everyone probably on that, and that's why we're here today. So why don't we just dive directly into that, Steve's story. So Steve, I know you have a great story to tell. I'll just throw the ball right over to you. Talk about some of the challenges that you faced.
Yeah, so I've been at Ivendi for 9 years. We've grown from 3 people to over 100 in that time period. We obviously, in the early days, your application has got one sort of domain. Functionality and features are quite low, so it's quite easy for everyone to keep the naming and the features, everyone understands them, everyone knows what they do, knows what they are. And, a centralized data team at that point makes perfect sense because everyone's on the same page. There's very little flux or change. You're going at a slow pace. But I think it's as you start to grow, you start to divide your teams up into separate product teams, the functionality increases, the scope of your problem you're trying to solve for your users grows, and the requests coming into the data team grow, and they're massively bottlenecked, and they also can't keep the whole of the business in their heads to understand every facet of the business.
Yeah.
And also, as you grow, features are the most important thing. Your sort of product analytics tends to be an afterthought, and everyone's busy, everyone's working at 110%. You release a feature, and then somebody goes, "Oh, how's that feature going?" The product manager says, "Oh, we've no idea. We've got a vague idea in GA, but not everything's hooked up. The conversion page isn't hooked up, and X, Y, and Z. Analytics is an afterthought. No one's collaborated. You may have a warehouse pulling in data from collectors, but you tend to get into a fragmented pipeline. The data engineers are not talking to product aren't really speaking to their application engineers about analytics and the importance of it, and the schemas. They kind of say, we need to collect these events, and then it's kind of up to the JavaScript developer to put it live. And then the next week they ask the data engineer, "Oh, you should have some data. Can I have a report?" And the data engineer knows nothing about it. It's all new. He doesn't know where to go to explore the context of this event, and it ends up in his warehouse, and it's a big shock.
Hey, Steve, one quick question on that, because one thing I've seen a lot is that I think you make a really good point that, I think collecting data and centralizing in the warehouse is awesome. Even just doing that, I think, is huge for a lot of companies. But if analytics are an afterthought, I think a lot of times what you see is that someone's just writing a monumental amount of SQL to clean up this giant mess. And there's usually one person, who knows like these 3,000 lines of SQL really well, and they're the only person who can deal with it because it's so fragile.
Yeah, we have those
10,000 joins and
yes,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, the result of ending up with those horrendous SQL scripts are, the team as a whole haven't planned what they want to actually discover. They don't have hypotheses. They're just collecting data and hoping to make sense of it, out of the warehouse. And it's all on, the SQL expert to try and glean information. And it's not seen as a, as a first-class citizen of the overall product team that, we're doing this work to increase conversion. We're doing work to increase our performance, our happiness. How are we actually achieving that? How are we doing? How are we going to monitor if we are actually providing value?
Yeah. And maybe to jump in here to just sort of step onto Eric's point there, it's not only that there is like an immense amount of SQL work that has to be done, it's also done by, like, I think this is a really great point that you bring up here, Steve, with like, there's a data person there somewhere, or a data team that has to make sense of data that they ultimately had no say in. And it's like, and so they're not only like, hacking together these SQL queries to fix the data. They also just don't know exactly what the data means, and it takes a lot of discovery to learn that. And that's probably a lot of like that sort of point behind what Eric was saying is, you know, we have a single person that knows it, and they had to spend a lot of time just to get to know some of that data, but that data changes with every single product release. So it's sort of an insurmountable project.
And I think the rest of the product team, you know, you've got your UX people who they're using various tools to mock out UX. You've got your you know, product and developers who are, you know, collaborating on features with tickets. The code they're developing is going into source control, and everything's well structured. But then the analytics and the data and the schemas are not. So yeah. Why is that? Why is that?
Yeah, that's a great point. And then you brought up this point about sort of also, I guess I'll let you take that away as well.
Yeah, so that's because you've got you haven't got a lot of collaboration, you've got no formalized plan to version these events that you want to end up in the warehouse. You know, there's a lack of governance. You know, any old data is passing through. There's no sort of security checks. There's no sense checks anywhere, and you know, it ends up in the warehouse, and the data engineer has to deal with it, and to try to track back to where things may have been broken, reports or dashboards or anything like that. You know, they've got to find the right engineer who's made those changes. They've got to go back into GitHub to look at which change has impacted them. And it just takes a long time. There's a lot of, you know, involvement from a lot of people. And, you know, in that time, your dashboards are broken. Your customers are, you know, reading bad data or no data if it's severely broken. So, you know, it's not an efficient way to go about things, especially at scale.
Mm-hmm. And then you get the swamp.
Yeah, you end up, you know, after 8 years, your warehouse can become a bit of a data swamp that people don't want to go near. And, you know, it's scary. And only that one person who's written that 10,000 SQL script will ever go near it. And he's leaving. Exactly. You're in trouble.
Yeah. So I know you mapped out also a few great examples here of that swamp. So let's talk through that.
Yeah. So, of course, you know, we've organically grown quickly. Features are going out. How this has ended up is no one's fault. You know, it's no one individual's fault. It's just, you know, I'm sure a lot of companies have ended up here. So I came, you know, I looked at the data. I was hearing comments of, you know, data quality. We don't trust that. So I started to investigate a little bit into the warehouse and you know, the schemas, the events, and then, you know, after analysing things inside of indicative, you know, I got a sense of the root cause of the problems. So you can see here we've got multiple ways of defining a click. You know, it's click, uppercase click, space click, clicked. I think we also had clicks in there as well. But you can see there's no real naming standards. And we've also got nonsensical events as well, click. You know, there's no context. If you're a data engineer, you're ending up with a click event in your warehouse. You know, who clicked what, you know, no click, you know, open click, what does that mean? Yes click, and then click. So, you know, you can understand anyone who's coming in, they're trying to build a funnel within indicative. They're looking for events that make up that funnel. You're scrabbling around to try and work out, you know, you've actually got to go through the application itself to see when these beacons are being called with those event names to try and understand the funnel. And it's just inefficient, and, you know, it's not a nice place to be.
Yeah, this is triggering a lot of PTSD here for me. It's just the life of a data scientist, I guess, a little bit as well. Yeah, this is really great. Thank you for sharing these. It's just incredible, and I'm sure a lot of people here can relate exactly to what this looks like right here. And then you have another angle on it as well, with like the definitions of what things mean, really.
Yeah. So this is more for, as you scale, you've got multiple product teams dealing with different bounded contexts, different domains within a business, and it's just to highlight the naming is hard, and naming can be confused across teams. One team's customer is not another team's customer.
Yeah, that's a great example. And can you just to elaborate on what that means? Like, what would a customer mean to potentially the logistics team versus the marketing team, for example?
Yeah, so you could say logistics, their customer may be the transport company, as opposed to an individual. It could be a transport. They've got a direct link, direct contract, and then their actual customer is the travel company, as opposed to marketing, who could have multiple customers. Consumers could be a customer, and they could have other customers as well who do work for them. Outsourced members of staff, contractors, multiple meanings. But you can see to a data engineer who's faced with many tables. Each one of those tables has got a customer underscore ID. The data engineer thinks they can safely join between those, and then they're in shock when they're getting 0 results. There's no join, there's no correlation. That's because they're actually different entities. They are different things.
Yeah, totally. And this is sort of touching a little bit on naming convention as well, and the complexity of like having, for example, in your case, when you have sort of a marketplace and you have multiple sort of types of people that are interacting and multiple types of customers, and then it can just be pretty tricky to have a too high level ID like this that people don't really understand what means.
Yeah.
So documentation for what things mean and being explicit about namings of properties can be extremely helpful for this.
Yeah, so obvious ways to fix this would be to prefix those IDs with the context, the team, the domain, however you want to split it out, but to prefix those so when it ends up in the warehouse, there is at least some context, and it can spark a thought, which doesn't involve endless conversations back and forth to actually understand what it is. And it's easier for new starters coming in because there's context there. Yeah,
this is great. And then this angle of the challenge as well. Numbers don't match. We touched on it a little bit in setting the stage, but here's literally what your stack used to look like.
Yeah, so we had web apps with beacons directly going into GA for various counts and metrics. We also had we were using Snowplow at the time, so apps would speak to a Snowplow collector, and that data would end up in the warehouse in Redshift. Snowplow also brought out a few years ago a relay, so you were able to directly feed indicative via the Snowplow pipeline. But of course, what you've got across those is different numbers everywhere, and internally, people see a difference. They start to distrust the data. They start to question the data all the time. They start, every conversation is a question. Are you sure that's right? Are you sure that's right? And it just breeds uncertainty in the business, and sort of you need to win that trust back.
Awesome. Eric, did you want to add anything to this?
GA is impacted by ad blockers and all the new cookie regimes within browsers, first party, third party. So those numbers are never going to add up, and GA is open to sampling as well. So
yeah,
data have a really hard time trying to explain all the time why the numbers do not add up, because non-technical people think they should always add up.
Yeah, for sure. I think I think lots of people have had the experience where, your boss says, can you give me a login to the analytics tool? And you get nervous because you're like, I have so much qualification to do, before this makes sense. Steve, I think the other thing that I'd be interested to know, and I am asking this because I've just, done similar things, but I look at this and I'm like, man, one event requires you to adjust multiple different, SDKs or pipelines, which is a huge pain. And this, I know probably your production stack is more complex than this in its full form, but even something that's kind of simple like this that only has a couple of data flows, it's like, okay, well, we want to add an event for whatever product viewed, say, and the number of places that you have to touch to do that is such a pain. I just remembered it's like, okay, well, I have to go figure out how to do that in GA, and, who has a list of GA events so I don't overwrite something, or, and then it's just a huge pain.
And it's also, it impacts your applications as well, because you're downloading multiple scripts for each, each endpoint you want to hit. You've also, your developers, you need to abstract the tracking away, and inside, a generic tracking function, they're having to call X, Y, and Z. They're having to do if statements around there to say, am I interested in this for this particular use case or not? And it becomes a maintenance burden in itself.
Yeah, and it's that, in my opinion, like, of course, we have to do instrumentation and other things like that. That just goes with the territory of working with data. But I think one of the hidden costs is that sort of unnecessary replication and troubleshooting is the worst use of the data team's time, right? It's sort of janitorial work that isn't necessary. And so, which I think, in the worst case scenarios, creates even retention problems for employees, because no one wants to go tinker with all of that junk all the time when they're already overworked.
Yeah, that is actually, I have to jump in there. And this is literally one of the biggest points for when I wanted to start Avo was I have had this problem so many times, and my coworkers and my colleagues all over the world, they're miserable. Like, employee churn in the data space is just terrible. And people are like, I don't want to work in data ever again. And we need people working in data. Like, that's a really good point you're bringing up there.
I think it's a sense of ownership as well, because you've got your application developers, JavaScript developers, they're not really brought into the analytics because they rarely see it. It doesn't impact them in any way apart from having to put in a new event.
Yeah,
they're not brought into the benefits it can give them. If they've got them seeing no insight, it's just one task for them. They're not aware of the pain that it actually causes further down the funnel. They've never seen the warehouse. They're not, expected to open SQL to understand the raw data. It doesn't hit home. But that's because Sorry, Steph.
Go ahead. No, yeah, I was just going to say you're hitting home here, but you wanted to add like that's because of something. So I didn't want to interrupt you there.
Yeah, that's because there's no shared ownership, around the analytics, end to end.
Yeah, this is just such a strong point. And I always love the analogy of the migration from when we had specific like QE engineers or QA engineers or quality engineers or testing engineers that would write unit tests or integration tests for developers after the developers developed the product. And we've completely migrated away from that process. So developers write their own unit tests and they sort of own the quality of their code and the release. And I think that shift will also happen in product analytics. Like, developers are such an integral part of releasing products. And I think often we actually don't, like, I think there's a tendency to not give developers the credit that they deserve. And like, of course they care about the products that they ship. Like, they are pretty intelligent people, like, and like they care passionately, typically, about the work that they're doing. And I think they're often discredited there, and like, you know, they don't care about this stuff, so I'll just, you know, abstract it away from them. But bringing them into this process can just have a huge, huge, huge impact.
There's no reason why, you know, we shouldn't have integration tests that actually synthetically go through your applications and then assert the data in the warehouse, you know, is true and correct.
Yeah. So, but we're sort of over to like basically talking about how we're going to solve this and how you solve this. So would love to start that conversation. Like, this is a really great point.
Yeah, so taking the earlier slide regarding the multiple ways to describe a click event or not describe a click event, as the case was in certain events, you know, back to the drawing board, it was important for us to have a centralized way to collaborate on, you know, a data tracking plan and the events, the schema, and the metrics. You know, what were the things we were trying to measure, and what are the events that are going to be needed in order to measure that particular thing. So I think it was key that we needed a centralized space where product teams could come together to iterate and actually build up a tracking plan that was, you know, hopefully versioned. It, you know, to get away from analytics being an afterthought, this, you know, having to collaborate in that way meant, you know, it would be a first-class citizen as part of the development, you know, end-to-end life cycle.
Yeah, and create that single source of truth.
Yeah, so a single source of truth. What do I mean by that? It's purely there, like Avo sort of doesn't allow duplicate event names, so you're not going to get duplicates from different teams for different things. It will prevent that because the tracking plan is a global tracking plan. There's actually no way to create a duplicate event, so it's forcing you all the time to think about what you're doing in the structure and the naming conventions, and it's also upholding those. So, you know, whether you go for camel case, snake case, you know, whatever is your fancy, Avo will help you, and it will say, hey, you know, you're adding a new event, but it's going against the grain of what you've already got in your tracking plan. You need to change this. So it's coming out and it's guiding you, and it's making sure you're not ending up in that data swamp.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Eric, take it away.
I was just going to say, it's to our previous point about, you know, no one really intends to create a swamp in the warehouse. It's pretty wild how many places you have to check if you're trying to do that manually. Means so many places, right? And so, Steve, to your point, it's like, okay, we want to roll out this feature, we want to do this, and it's like, okay, well, I mean, QA 20 different points at which, you know, there may be some sort of issue. It's pretty crazy. And I think the other thing that's interesting is a lot of those things are kind of, it's not like people don't necessarily know how to solve that problem or think through that. It's just who has the time to build that framework. There's no, you know, it's like there isn't time to build this really complex like governance framework and then the rules for enforcing it. I mean, that's just a huge amount of business process. And so it makes so much sense to say like, okay, great. Like, we'll just take care of that for you. centrally. And so you don't have to think about it. And it's those guardrails, right? Okay, I'm moving fast. I want to collect data on this feature. Oh, wait, like somehow this is a duplicate event name, right? And under other circumstances,
companies have tried, you could hold one in Excel or Google Sheets, you could write code to try and drift through the event names to prevent duplicate naming, but it's a maintenance overhead. Who's got time to do that work and build another product?
Yeah, and like I have to jump in here because I actually did a user interview this week, and I asked someone, how would you explain Avo using your words? And they were saying Avo is the bad cop of product analytics enforcement. And another angle on it was Avo is the actually person that no data person ever wants to be, because it's like, it was so good. It's just, it cracked me up. And like, nobody wants to be the actually person, and data people have to do that all the time, just because like people are interpreting data in various different ways. And they're like, actually we have to, and they all like, and they were sort of bringing up the point about like, when machines can validate these things for you, like let them be the actually person and sort of reduce the overhead of the need for the data person to be the actually person. And I think also we're bringing up a really important point here. And, it's not only about, because I know you also brought up the point here about the code generation, which is around, confirming that the implementation actually matches the specification. But the thing is, developers often get blamed for these inconsistencies, while the source of the problem can also very often be because there is no single source of truth for what events already exist. So there are just a lot of different people creating a lot of different versions of the same user action event. And so it can happen very far upstream, or it can happen very far down the line, basically.
Yeah. So again, Avo, the code gen of the events and the schema, it's holding your hand. It's ensuring the UI engineers cannot go out of band or go rogue and add in attributes that you don't want in there. Because of the sort of Avo and the debugger, it's warning you if you're going against the grain, if you're doing something wrong, and that event is prevented from ending up in your warehouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So of course, using the Avo Rudderstack Code Gen, you can define the pipelines within Rudderstack. The data team are getting nice curated tables, raw tables in the warehouse, and they're not dealing with integrations. They're not dealing with APIs to the product analysis tool. They're not batching up, rows of events in S3 to then batch it into their warehouse. All that takes time and needs hand holding. So it's just nice to outsource that to a Rudderstack. They've already done the work. It's proven to work across hundreds of their other customers. So I don't have to worry about that. The data team can provide value from the data rather than having to worry about getting the data into the warehouse.
Yeah, this is awesome.
And subsequently, as you spoke before, the data engineers spend less time debugging, fault finding, going through logs, going through web applications, speaking to the application engineers, the product teams to find out what's gone wrong when, and the customers are happy because they've got consistent dashboards, they're not breaking, you don't need to send out emails that make the company look bad because you're down, they've been down for 2 days, you still can't track what's broken down in the pipeline.
Yeah.
That's the worst message to get, when someone says this dashboard is broken, and then the fire drill that ensues where the data team goes and figures that out. And then it's horrifying when you realize, oh, we're not sending emails that we should send, or because this piece of data broke, we just, blasted the entire database with some sort of crazy, email. Like those are really bad weeks at work for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. It's also like it's those moments that bring the team together. Sometimes you have to go through these moments to figure out that you have to solve them. But I think we're getting to a maturity in the industry where people just know this is a problem and they can start to actually proactively prevent it before it happens. So that's
totally
actually really exciting. Yeah, so obviously like the pipelining and managing the tools in the stack is also a huge value add, Steve, as you are mentioning here as well.
Yep. The data market, the tooling, the product analysis, applications are, it's growing thick and fast, and it's nice to try different things at the click of a button. It's nice to sign up for another marketing SaaS tool or a new product analysis tool, and as long as Rudder have done an integration, you can start to trial it out. Within 5 minutes, data can be in there, and you can start to see if it's better than your incumbent. If the data team had to write all that plumbing themselves, you'd never get in their backlog to do that. And even if you did, then it's more engineering effort for them, and it's taking them away from, again, creating value from the data if they're dealing with plumbing.
Steve, I was thinking recently about this. One interesting thing that we've seen is, I think that adoption of Google Analytics 4 is slow because of that. I mean, the amount people who have like even a sort of reasonably robust setup in Google Analytics with any sort of events, redoing all of that is a non-trivial amount of work. And then you have to figure out, okay, well, we got to run this on staging, or we have to run both of these things. Like, it's just, it's like, okay, well, then you're loading more stuff on your site. And there's all sorts of issues there. It's really interesting. And it is so nice just to say, let's literally just plug GA4 into an existing feed and just look at the data. And you can do it the same day.
It's magical.
It is really magical. It is really magical.
Yeah, and it's proper agility, isn't it? Being able to pick and choose, pivot quickly in your pipeline just brings tons of benefits.
Yeah. One other thing actually that comes to mind on that is that we've seen that's just, again, kind of magical is, let's say, especially on the product analytics side, let's say you want to switch an analytics tool or even do any sort of reporting migration or whatever. One of the challenges is historical data.
Yep.
But if you've been dumping all the data into your warehouse, you can actually rerun all the historical data, right? So I fire up a new analytics tool, and instead of starting from day 0 and waiting to collect enough data for it to be meaningful, which for some companies can take weeks or months, you can instantly have, years worth of data.
So that's the reverse ETL. In Rudder. So yeah, we've still got a bunch of data in Redshift, but I can pull that through back into Rudder and then out into ClickHouse pretty quickly without any engineering effort. I don't have to write anything myself.
Yeah, this is pretty awesome.
This is maybe a great segue into sort of what does that end-to-end consistency look for you today, I guess.
Yep. Yeah. So any new product feature needs to include a collaboration and a naming sort of task where everyone focuses on Avo to get the naming right, to understand the events, the attributes, and describe them, publish them. So everyone's working from the same page, everyone from UI through to the data engineering.
And I think one of the beautiful things here about this is like, okay, so what we see here is, number one, we see consistent casing. You've committed to the snake case.
Yep.
And what we also see here, which is so different from what we saw on slide 4, something like that, slide 6, is there is nothing here that is just undescribed name of an event. It is all from the perspective. There's no click. It's all the intent of the user. Like, what was the user actually doing? It's not about button clicks. It's not about page changes. It's about what was the user intention when that action fired.
Yeah, because what do 600 page clicks, button clicks mean as opposed to 4,000? Is it a good or a bad thing?
Exactly.
So that little segment there is just the published, is the Avo generated code. You can see that it's fallen back to JavaScript naming conventions, which the JS engineers will be used to. Snake case in JS would look a little bit odd. But
yeah, so the function and the code, it matches the naming, or like the casing convention of that programming language, even though you're triggering the event in the standardized consistent casing across all of the different platforms that might be triggering this event.
Yeah, correct. And because in Avo I've defined Rudderstack as a destination, Avo handles the plumbing code. So when I define an event, in Avo, it automatically is sent into Rudderstack. And this is just an example of a Rudderstack pipeline. You can see website A, any events that are coming into website A are being fed to destination, in my case, ClickHouse and indicative. So you can see in both, the schema in ClickHouse is exactly as you defined it inside of Avo. The same with indicative. So it's clear end to end. You've got a consistent feel, and it just feels warmer and easier to work with and sensical. This isn't, it's not easy, by the way. Even Avo, some events can take days to collaborate on and rework and rewording, reprefixing. It's not an easy thing to work out, even in a mature domain business context. It is still quite hard, and you need to whirlpool it. You need to collaborate on it and come up with the best naming that you can at that time. Yeah.
And one thing to maybe highlight in this sort of graph here, and Eric, feel free to also jump in if there's anything you have in mind here. But like the thing and how this works here is like you define your schemas here in Avo. And the first step here and the first integration point is that Avo is generating code snippets this is the code snippet that developer is sort of calling from the code base.
Yep.
And this is code generated code. And these are the properties that the developer is passing into that code snippet. And then if we were to like take a step back here, which we don't have literally on this slide, but you can take a look at that on our website. What happens behind then this is code generated calls directly to the Rudderstack SDK. So the Rudderstack SDK is sending the events directly from the device, and none of those events are going through Avo at any point, but they're getting triggered directly into Rudderstack here. And an additional integration point there is sort of publishing that schema with the descriptions of that event, of all of those events directly into Rudderstack. So if you are in Rudderstack and you're trying to filter like which events should go into ClickHouse and which events should go into indicative and which events should go into apps flyer or whatever, then you have like not only a good naming convention for all of your events, but also those descriptions of those events right there to support you in sort of choosing which event should go where, basically.
Yep.
Yeah, that was a great explanation. And Rudderstack here obviously is the pipeline that makes it easy to really just do instrumentation one time. Avo ensures that the data is clean and aligns to the plan that the team has collaborated on. And in going back to the way that we were thinking about the pain of, okay, we roll out a new feature and someone has to go in and actually instrument, 6 different things for GA and the product analytics tool and whatever. With Rudderstack, you instrument the event one time and it goes to all of your destinations. So we see too here a warehouse and a product analytics tool. But you could add Google Analytics, right? And the events that flow into Google Analytics would align with the schema that you've defined in Avo. And so it really takes the painful plumbing, the bad use of the data engineer's time. It takes that out of the equation, right? You define the metrics. Avo takes care of all of that governance piece, instrument it in Rudderstack, and then all of the plumbing to your entire stack happens automatically from there, which is pretty nice.
Yep.
Yeah, this is really fantastic. And so, I want to sort of move a little bit into maybe questions from the audience here. Is there anything before we do that you want to add here, Steve or Eric? Probably
not for me.
Awesome. So ultimately, like what we're trying to do here is, I love this framing from Steve. So ensuring that data and analytics are a first-class citizen and not an afterthought. And we'll definitely, hopefully, like we're changing a little bit how the Ivendi team works with data. So that's really great. And we have a couple of questions already from the audience, and we have about 8 minutes left today, or 7 roughly. And I would say, like, a great question here from Tomi at Zen Business. What are some of the key advantages of using Avo and Rudderstack together, would you say, Steve?
Yeah, I think because the code generation, is getting done for you. Your engineers have less work to do. I do believe, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, but Avo and Rudder are building out on the functionality within Rudderstack, so you can sort of define what happens to events that are coming through incorrectly. If you allow them through from Avo, you'll be able to do more things, and sort of fix them and then stick them back into the pipeline in order to correct them.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and you're right, Steve. So that's, there are, well, I would say to answer the question at a high level, which is kind of restating a little bit of what you said, Steve, is that Rudderstack by design allows pretty flexible schemas because every business is different and they need to collect different types of data. And so we don't want to make the decision for the data team on what the structure of their data needs to be. They need to make that decision so that it aligns with their business and they can feed all the downstream tools and stakeholders, et cetera. But there's an inherent challenge there in that businesses, like, it makes sense for things to be flexible, but that puts the onus on the end users to provide governance, which, as we've discussed, is just a monumental challenge. And so I think the beauty of Avo and Rudderstack together is that you sort of automate the governance work that is really hard to find the time to do and creates a lot of maintenance, work. You take care of that from the outset, and really drive that collaboration with the team on what data you want to track and what is correct. And then Rudderstack can syndicate that to your entire stack so that you're not working on the annoying low-level plumbing problems. So really, we kind of see it as like, if you have the governance and the integrations work taken care of, then the data team can really focus on trying to drive value as opposed to just fixing, little stuff all the time that's really annoying. But yes, to your question, Steve, we have some exciting things that we're working on, especially around how do you manage, because even if you do everything correctly, you define everything, like somewhere someone is going to get an event through the system that doesn't align, or they add another source and don't tell anyone. I mean, this stuff just happens. And so we're doing some really neat things around how to manage those situations gracefully, right? So if something comes through that doesn't align with what you've defined, you don't necessarily want to lose that data, but you need to be alerted about that, and you need to make some decisions on what to do with that.
I think that's important, because when you do a release of a new web, you put functionality in there, you've changed schema slightly, people are going to be running cached versions of the old app, so you're still going to get those older versions in, but you don't want to lose them.
Exactly.
It's a great point.
Yeah, it's a really great point. And like this is just touching on just personal experiences. I remember when we had set up some validations back in the days that would block events from flowing through, and that just sometimes can't be the solution that you go for. And I want to just like quickly also touch on this, like Avo and Rudderstack together. Obviously, this is super exciting, and I think there is this really very underappreciated and underestimated part of the of product analytics, and even just going into marketing analytics. Everything is now becoming event driven, and we are endlessly creating leverages and tools for a lot of the different plumbing, and it is bringing us closer to a lot more people are coming into making use of data and being a part of releasing data that aren't necessarily super technical or don't have a technical background. They don't necessarily have an engineering background, but they are so important in that creation and the planning part of the analytics release. And I think there is like Avo and Rudderstack together are creating really important leverages in different stages of that sort of data life cycle, and like that first birth point, just enabling sort of more of like a self-serve analytics governance creates so much leverage for the data team, for them to be able to be involved in a supporting role while still empowering the product teams and sort of a little bit less of the experienced people to create good data. I think is like a really important piece, and then just stitches so beautifully together in with Rudderstack that will enable you to send data wherever you want, whenever you want it. So I think I'm really excited about this partnership. So that's really exciting. We definitely, like, we also had a question. We have so many questions here and we won't be able to get to them, but I think like maybe Steve, if you can talk a little bit about like, what are you thinking about next? Where are you going next in terms of your data stack, and like, what are you excited about after this now that you've established so much here?
I think rolling this out across the whole estate to all the product teams, and actually getting that team buy-in to analytics and being able to use the analytics to make a decision about a feature, produce that feature, get it into production, and then see the results instantly after an hour, and being able to be autonomous in that way. So the data is working for them, they can self-serve that data and use it, and ultimately they can drive a product's future for themselves at a quicker pace using data.
Awesome. So this is a really great way to wrap up. Beautiful new world for everyone. So just to wrap things up here with us today, I want to say thank you so much, Steve and Eric, for being with us today. And if you want to get started on this journey, you can go over to avo.app or rudderstack.com and start poking around, playing around. This video will be accessible also online if you want to share it with some other people, and feel free to, of course, reach out to us directly. You can find our information in the registration page, our direct information, so you can DM us on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever you want to do. And reach out to support@avo.app. And where do they go to find Rudderstack, Eric?
Yeah, you can just go to rudderstack.com or feel free to shoot me an email. That's Eric, ERIC @rudderstack.com. Love talking about this stuff and happy to answer any questions.
Perfect. Thank you everyone so much for being with us today. And thank you so much for your time, Steve, for sharing this great story. And thank you, Eric, for being a fantastic co-partner, co-pilot for this webinar.
It was great. Thanks for having us.
That's great. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We will see you all soon. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.